As a quick note before this video, I would like to point out that this is intended as a follow-up to my previous video on Pokemon Red and Blue. If you have any knowledge of those games, though, it's not required viewing before watching this video. I would also like to note that I'm analyzing this game mostly as a single-player game, meaning I'm not taking trading into account, nor am I talking about multiplayer balance. Pokemon Yellow was the third version of Pokemon released internationally, and the fourth released in Japan. Like its predecessors, it follows the journey of the protagonist as he travels the Kanto region capturing Pokemon, defeating gyms, the villainous Team Rocket, and eventually the Pokemon League. However, it featured many changes that, in my opinion, easily make it the best Generation 1 Pokemon game. As I mentioned, this was the fourth game in Japan. While future Pokemon games would get only a single extra version, or a pair of extra versions intended to complement each other, Generation 1 is the only generation that received two completely unrelated extra versions. While I have never played the Japanese Blue version, I've read enough about it to know that there's not enough different from the international Red and Blue to be worth playing over them, at least for me. The plot and characters remain completely identical, and Pokemon locations and availability are changed, though not as radically as Yellow would later change them. Ironically, the biggest changes from Japanese Blue, new sprites for every Pokemon, and an altered layout for the post-game Cerulean Cave, were made a part of the international Red and Blue, which otherwise are identical to Red and Green in terms of Pokemon locations. This means that I'm personally more likely to want to play the Japanese Red and Green over Japanese Blue, just to experience that final dungeon. Though just a different final dungeon or sprites isn't enough to make these games a wildly different experience either. No, to make a Kanto game worth playing over Red and Blue, I need more than that. There needs to be large changes made to the game in order to make me care about it. And that is exactly what we got with Pokemon Yellow. Right from the beginning, the game lets you know that this is not the same as Red, Blue, or Green. When you enter into the tall grass, rather than being dragged off and given one of the classic fire, water, or grass starters, you instead are attacked by a Pikachu, which Professor Oak catches and soon gives to you. Inside the lab, the rival shows himself to be even more of a jerk and takes the Pokemon that was intended for you, before you even have a chance to touch the Pokeball. The Pokemon he obtains is an Eevee, instead of any of the original starters. From this point on, the plot mostly remains identical to the original games, but there are other changes made to the gameplay making this a different experience from the originals. After your initial fight with your rival, your Pikachu refuses to return to its Pokeball, and follows you around instead, much like Pikachu from the anime. That's right, if you don't already know, even though it's very obvious, Yellow exists solely to recursively adapt aspects of the anime back into the games. However, most of these adaptations are either positive or neutral to how they affect the game. Pikachu, however, is not one of the positives, and may be the closest to a negative that this game has. While the Pikachu ever following you around is fun and near the beginning of the game, Pikachu is extremely powerful, the novelty factor wears off quickly and his power is quickly outpaced. You might say, why don't you just evolve it once he falls behind your other Pokemon? Raichu may not be the strongest Pokemon, but he isn't bad. And that is when we learn why Pikachu is a negative to the experience of Pokemon Yellow. You can't evolve him, or rather he refuses to evolve. If you want to evolve him, you'll need to trade him to another game and evolve him there, and then trade him back. Being unable to evolve Pikachu really was a dumb decision on the part of the developers. I get that part of the draw of this game was to replicate Ash's Pikachu from the anime, but if I want to have my own Pokemon journey when my Pikachu evolves, why can't I? And it really hurts for me, because I quite like Pikachu and Raichu as Pokemon, and I really dislike not using my starter for the entire game. However, these are all aspects I can get over easily, and for the most part doesn't hurt the game too much. I typically just treat whatever Nidoran, Mankey, or Pidgey I catch near the beginning as my starter, and move on, eventually depositing Pikachu permanently into the PC when I get a sixth Pokemon I intend on using. There is one part of Pikachu that is at the very least interesting, but not particularly impactful, and that is the happiness system. While it only matters for obtaining a single Pokemon pretty early in the game, the happiness system is interesting because it would later be fleshed out and applied to every Pokemon starting in Gold and Silver. Basically, every interaction with Pikachu alters its happiness level. Leveling up, using items, fainting, etc. All this does, though, is that when you talk to Pikachu in the overworld, he'll have a different icon depending on his current happiness level. Pikachu does a few other things in certain locations, where he'll stop following you and go up to whatever Pokemon catches his eye, but it's nothing important to the gameplay. Just because Pikachu replaced the starters doesn't mean that they are removed from the game though, and this is quite possibly the biggest draw about Yellow for me. You can obtain all 3 of the original starters in the game from 3 different NPCs, in pretty quick succession as well. Bulbasaur is the first one you can obtain. Inside this girl's house in Cerulean, she mentions that she wants to give away her Bulbasaur to a good trainer, and, if your Pikachu's happiness is high enough, she'll offer it to you. This is the only time the happiness stat matters in the game. Also, if your happiness isn't high enough, you can easily boost it by repeatedly trying to use a potion on Pikachu when it has max HP. The second one you can obtain is Charmander. Charmander's trainer gives it to you with no prerequisites just north of Nugget Bridge. The last one, Squirtle, is given to you by a police officer in Vermilion after you have beaten Lieutenant Surge. While you are by no means required to use any of them, it is nice to have the option to use multiple starters on the same playthrough. One of the biggest changes made to the gameplay is in Pokemon movesets. Several Pokemon had the levels they learned certain moves changed, as well as had entire moves added to their level up or TM options. While it would take too long to go over all of them, I will briefly talk about the 5 that are the most interesting to me. The first one is Pikachu. Being the mascot of the game and a required starter, it's not too surprising that Pikachu also received a bunch of new moves for level up. There's a couple of stat change moves, Swift was replaced with Slam, and Pikachu can now learn Thunderbolt at level 26, which is notable because before this game, Thunderbolt was only learnable via TM. Both Nidoran lines had their movesets altered so that they can learn Double Kick at level 12 instead of 43. This is extremely important for reasons that I will cover in a little bit. Kadabra and Alakazam had Kinesis added as a move that they learn at level 1, which is a default move that they have in the wild only, and only below level 27 as well. This is notable because while Kinesis was technically a move that existed in the games before, no Pokemon could learn it, meaning it was only usable by using Metronome and getting it randomly. The last, and arguably most important, moveset change that I'm going to talk about is Charizard's. While his level up remains identical, he is now capable of learning Fly via HM. This means that Charizard is now capable of using a flying type move, which is great because being a flying type and not being able to use any flying type moves was a little ridiculous. Much like Japanese Blue, Yellow alters the locations of Pokemon. However, Yellow has locations of Pokemon species more radically changed than Japanese Blue did. Blue mostly used one or the other of Red or Green's Pokemon, except for the locations that had the previously in-game trade Pokemon in the wild. Yellow, however, massively changes Pokemon locations, with Pokemon available in locations that they have never been in before. Almost every location where wild Pokemon appear had changes made to what Pokemon appear and how often. For instance, Mankey is available as early as Route 22 west of Viridian. Both Nidoran are available on Route 2, and Pidgeotto is available at low levels in Viridian Forest. And along with that, there are many other changes. This can easily change up how you construct your team as you would play the game, compared to what you would have done in Red and Blue. The Mankey and Nidoran location change is important. Like in the previous games, the first gym leader is Brock, who uses 2 high defense ground rock types. However, unlike the previous game, your starter learns electric moves. This means that if you don't catch another Pokemon before his gym, you're going to have some trouble. Mankey and Nidoran both learn fighting moves at low levels in Yellow, making it possible to deal super effective damage to Brock's Pokemon. The addition of Mankey and the change to Nidoran's moves was a great change that probably should have been in the originals due to Charmander's similar, but not as crippling, issue with facing Brock. They did end up putting Mankey in this location in the remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green, but it was less necessary as Charmander now learned Metal Claw at level 13, though that is still a slightly high level to be at when facing Brock. Another change Yellow did was to sprites, both of Pokemon and some trainers. Pokemon sprites tend to be changed to be way closer to what would end up being their finalized designs in later games, and are closer to the art used in promo images, strategy guides, and the anime. Trainers that are changed tend to be changed to look more like their anime counterparts. Notable characters include Brock and Misty, as well as Blue being given an outfit that looks more like Gary's. The Pokemon back sprites remain as incomprehensible as they were in previous games, though. During your encounters with Team Rocket, several grunts have been replaced with Jesse and James from the anime. They usually replace multiple grunts, but have a slightly stronger party than the average Team Rocket member to make up for it. They battle as a single unit, using only one Pokemon at a time. Specifically, they use their iconic Coughing and Ekans, later Weezing and Arbok, as well as Meowth, who acts as a regular Pokemon instead of as a character like he is in the anime. I find this change to be interesting, as they represent almost a mini-boss or pre-boss. In the first 2 encounters with Giovanni, they appear immediately before him, and in Mount Moon and the Pokemon Tower they are the strongest opponents there. Since in the original, the only unique Team Rocket member was Giovanni, it's interesting to have an additional recurring character, and I find their appearances comparable to the admins of future Pokemon games. While their presence is minor, they are the biggest alteration to the plot after obtaining Pikachu. A large change that was made to the actual flow of the game is the changes made to the gym leaders and the Elite Four. Brock is the only gym leader that is made easier in Yellow than he was in Red and Blue. However, the reduced levels of his Pokemon are likely just to account for your starter's inability to damage his Pokemon. Misty is the only gym leader whose party remains unchanged. After that, every other gym leader has had their Pokemon's party levels raised and what Pokemon they use changed, many of which to Pokemon which are inspired by their anime counterparts' parties. Some of these new parties are arguably easier, like Erika's and Koga's, who despite being higher levels are using worse Pokemon than before. Others, Sabrina specifically, but Blaine and Lieutenant Surge as well, can be more difficult due to these changes. The Elite Four uses the same parties at the same levels as in Red and Blue, but with many Pokemon having their movesets changed. This results in the Elite Four being more difficult because you can't exploit the bad AI to force them to use moves like Agility over and over again, because they think the Psychic attack will kill your poison Pokemon. They also increase the type coverage of some Pokemon, giving them moves they probably should have had in the first place, such as giving Lorelei's Dewgong a water attack and Bruno's Onix a ground attack. As you may have already realized from the different starter, the Rivals party has changed as well. While you battle him at the same locations as in Red and Blue, the Pokemon he uses are different. By the champion fight, the only Pokemon he uses that are the same as in the original are Alakazam and Exeggutor. You may notice that since he begins with an Eevee, he has 3 options to evolve to. You're probably wondering how he chooses what to evolve to, and it turns out that it's based on how good you are against him at the beginning of the game, in the first fight in the lab, and the optional second one on Route 22 near Viridian. Losing in the lab has him use Vaporeon, beating him in the lab but losing or skipping the second one gets him Flareon, and winning both gets him Jolteon. I find this a fun way to set up the Rivals party because it is almost like a difficulty setting based on how good you, the player, are, since his evolution ends up being his strongest Pokemon. Vaporeon is weak to Pikachu's electric attacks, and thus is the one he gets if you fail to beat him early on. Jolteon resists Pikachu's electric attacks, making it his choice if you beat him twice, and Flareon is the medium option, being neither weak nor resistant to electric. Obviously this isn't really a difficulty setting, since your strongest Pokemon won't necessarily be Pikachu, but I find it a fun way to determine your rival's Pokemon instead of having it always having a type advantage against your starter, like in Red and Blue. Real briefly, I would like to talk about the change to Cerulean Cave, though I don't have much to say about it. Yellow has a new layout for Cerulean Cave. Compared to the version in Red and Blue, it seems similar in complexity, though maybe a bit less. In both versions, my tendency for the cave tends to be to wander around until I stumble into Mewtwo, so I don't find the different layout to be all too important to change, though it is something to be noted. There are 3 changes in Pokemon Yellow that I'd like to talk about that I will call ease of play changes. 2 of them are easy to miss, but important, and the other is impossible to miss unless you're playing a Japanese copy or on an original Game Boy. The first change is that the catching tutorial is forced on you instead of optional and easily missable. While this can be annoying for longtime fans, it is much shorter than catching tutorials in later games, and consequently is not as annoying. For new players who got this as their first game back in the day, or for some reason are playing this as their first game today, I'm sure it is much nicer for them than the one in Red and Blue that could be walked by without a second thought. The second change is in the Rocket Hideout when you battle the Grunt with the Lift Key. In the original game you had to talk to him again after the battle to get him to drop the Lift Key, and in Yellow he drops it immediately after the battle. I'm sure that the Lift Key has stumped many players in Red and Blue, and this is a very welcome change. The third is color palettes. When playing Red and Blue, you have to use the Super Game Boy in order to play the game with unique color palettes for the Pokemon, but with Yellow you can view its colors on the Game Boy Color, Advance, and in the 3DS Virtual Console. This wasn't in the Japanese version though, since it came out before the Game Boy Color did. Now for the biggest thing that could be a deal breaker for someone thinking about playing Yellow version, the unavailable Pokemon. I've already discussed my opinion on the lack of Raichu, but I don't really mind the rest that are unavailable. Plus, every version is missing some Pokemon anyway. For comparison, here are the Pokemon missing in Red and Blue, as well as in Japanese Blue. Interestingly, this is another point where they chose to make the game more similar to the anime. Team Rocket's iconic Pokemon lines, Atkins, Meowth, and Coughing, are unavailable, Weedle's line is also unavailable, likely to encourage you to use Caterpie like Ash did. So now to explain why I view all these factors as making Yellow the best version of Gen 1. So far all I've done is explain differences and allude to why I think some of them are positive. The biggest positives for Yellow are the moveset changes, the color palettes on all platforms, the improved gym leaders in Elite Four, and the ability to get all 3 original starters. Also the lift key. That's kind of dumb in the originals if you don't know about it or remember it. So is Yellow version going to make you love Gen 1 Pokemon games if you hate them? Probably not. Obviously it still has most of the issues that Gen 1 Pokemon has. But do I think this game is mostly an improvement over the originals? Yes, I do. I could see some people viewing the improved gym leaders in Elite Four as a negative, since the ability to exploit their AI is a big way to make Red and Blue a much more casual experience. And even though I think this is the best Generation 1 game, it doesn't work entirely as a substitute for Red and Blue, since starting with one of the regular starters is its own experience that you can't do in Yellow. I recommend you give Yellow version a shot, especially if you've played Red or Blue in the past. It offers a unique experience that you can't get in Red and Blue, and improves on them in many ways. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, feel free to subscribe. I also have a Twitch channel that I occasionally stream on, so follow that as well if you'd like. Next video probably won't be about Pokemon, but I'll eventually get back and do Gold and Silver. See you next time.